Hello, I'm Claire Hoy. No, not really. Hello, good evening, and welcome to Michael Coren Live on CTS. And it is good to be back. And in the immortal words of Gary Glitter, did you miss me when I was away? Don't answer all at once. Thanks to Claire Hoy for sitting in on Friday. I felt absolutely wretched. I think I've taken 4 nights off in 14 months being sick. But there was no way I could have come in on Friday. Otherwise, it would have been very entertaining television in a number of ways. Anyway, thanks again to Claire Hoy. What a bully he was to Sid Riley. Good week coming up for you. Incredible week. Very, very exciting. A lot of stuff to do. I'm not even sure how we're going to fit it all in, actually. Tonight, the first issue, one we haven't covered properly before, and it's a major issue because there's an enormous degree and amount of mythology, propaganda, downright lies at time about this issue. And it comes under many titles, and the semantics are important. Diversity in the workplace and in education, employment equity, the quota system, all these terms are used. They are significant. The idea of people of different color, different gender, being equally, fairly represented when it comes to the working environment, universities, and so on. Lines are open for you now, as they always are. 416-203-0302, 905-332-3131. Lots of people on the panel tonight. The first 4 we have on my far left, the man who put me on to the power protein diet, Paul McKeever, a lawyer and a member of the Freedom Party. Welcome to you. Welcome back.
Thank you.
On my close left is Adrienne Snow, a policy analyst for NFFRE, one of the ugliest acronyms I've come across, the National Foundation for Family Research and Education.
Well done.
Well done. On my right is Trevor Wilson, diversity strategist, author, and you can hold the book up actually if you want to give it a plug. Diversity at Work, the business.
Buy this.
There it is, the business case for equity. How much is it?
Who knows?
Cheap at half the price.
Yes.
And on my far right is Cheryl McConney, TV host of Daytime on Rogers Cable, and I see you all the time because whenever I switch on TV, there you are.
Do you watch the entire program?
No, certainly not. But you are very, very good. Don't be too good tonight, because I do enjoy my job. And
okay, honey.
Let's begin with you. Can we have a working definition here? And I know the vocabulary is important. When people say quota system, it's obviously meant to be pejorative. Oh, you want a quota system. When people say equity, well, that's fairness. What do we actually mean when we talk about any of the diversity, equity? What does that mean?
Well, I think when we talk about diversity, we're not just talking about race or gender. I think usually when we start talking about diversity, we focus on that. But diversity is supposed to be inclusive in terms of learning style, religion, all of the things that make you unique to a business. And equity is, in terms of employment equity, is specific. It's only the 4 designated groups. So it's only women, visible minorities, aboriginals, and people with disabilities. So when you discuss diversity, I think diversity was something that was supposed to get an opportunity to get all of the people working as well as possible in a business. And generally speaking, diversity hasn't been supported, in my estimation, as well as it should have. And what's going to happen, and is happening in different federally regulated companies, is that they're going to be audited. There's going to be employment equity sort of targets put in place because diversity hasn't been supported. So I think diversity is supposed to be inclusive. No matter who you are, you want to do your best job and be have access to information and opportunity. And in terms of equity, it's just the 4 groups that have been traditionally underrepresented.
So that's a federal regime that companies will be monitored, and if they don't live up to expectations, what happens then?
If they don't, well, it depends. Human rights will probably come in, and if they don't live up to expectations, they will say, based on the outside population, let's say if we're talking about a major city, saying, okay, if we have enough visible minorities of a particular training outside, why don't we have them inside? And so that human rights will say, okay, they're outside, we need a certain number inside. And it's up to you to do it within a certain time frame.
And if the company fails, there'll be what, financial
Probably
penalties?
fined.
All right. And this is
heavily.
This is in the private sector?
This is federally, as far as, you know, in terms of places like, you know, Health Canada or banks. Or
so we're not, and the banks too?
Sure.
So we're not talking about just the public sector, we're talking about everyone who employs?
Well, we're talking about federally regulated places, because if you're a private company, okay, and when we talk about diversity, again, it's in your best interest to deal with the people who are out there who are your consumers and get them in your business. But if you don't do that and your business fails, that's up to you.
Yeah, but it's not, apparently, is it? Because if it fails because of that, you're going to be also attacked by the government.
Well, you know, if you have a small business and you choose, okay, let's say I'm the business owner and I choose to hire the 4 people sitting at this table, and or maybe I don't. Maybe I choose to hire 4 Michael Corens.
What a wonderful thing.
Oh, I'm just being friendly with you. And the business doesn't work. That's my choice to choose you as an example of who I think the best candidate is. Yeah. If I'm talking about consumers outside who are now, when we talk about demographic changes, who are all varied, you know, different languages, come from different countries. If you want to appeal to them, you have to have people inside who understand them. And that might not be someone from one race.
But actually isn't the intention of the policy. I mean, the policy is not about helping people to make a profit. The policy is about fairness.
Well, it should be. But you know money's behind everything.
There's nothing inconsistent with treating people fair and making money. In fact, that's the premise of my book, is that the whole notion here is that the merit principle, which was getting the best candidate for the job, there's nothing inconsistent with that and treating people fairly. And there's nothing inconsistent with treating people fairly and getting to a better bottom line. In fact, the irony for me is that when we got rid of employment equity legislation here in Ontario, my company started doing more business than we had ever done. And I'm doing now more business in Europe and in other places that never had employment equity legislation, because companies are starting to see the business reasons behind it. And all it really comes down to is they're starting to recognize that merit doesn't just come in one package. When people ask me, what do? I say, I try to help companies maximize neurons per salary dollar. Now, the neurons, the brain cells in my head and brain cells in your head are exactly the same color. What's different is the packaging, as you can well see, as the packaging of the neurons. But the distinction here is getting companies to recognize that talent comes in all packages.
Woody Allen has a great line about being hired as part of employment equity. He was hired as a Jewish person to sit in a very visible position in a store, and then he was fired for taking off too many Jewish holidays. This all sounds very, very reasonable. I mean, what's wrong with this?
Well, I'm wondering if what Trevor says is true, that there's a strong bottom line incentive for companies to hire no matter who, as long as they have the skills, which is a statement I hardly agree with. If he then would turn around and say that we in fact don't need equity policies. I mean, that seems to be the logical conclusion of your line of work and the arguments you were just making, and yet you earn your dollars because we do have policies like this in place, I take it.
Oh, actually, I don't.
A huge contradiction.
That's the logical point. If it is in the interest of a company, and I believe profit is the motive of most of these people, why wouldn't they then do exactly what you want them without government intervention?
Well, I think first of all, not all companies are the same. So we have 20,000 companies in Ontario. Not all of them are going to do this.
But they all want
in fact, I would say, yeah, but that doesn't necessarily always know how to do it. And I think we probably deal with a small minority of companies that have recognized that this is in fact a business issue. We probably deal with the 20% of companies that have actually recognized that this whole issue of maximizing neurons per salary dollar makes a difference to the bottom line. The other 80% are either going to be forced to do it. I mean,
so they are going to be forced to do it?
Some of them will be forced to do it. I mean, there's only, now let's get real here. There's 350 federally regulated companies out of the, I don't know how many companies there are in Canada. There's about 2,500 other federally regulated companies, and they may, quote unquote, may be forced to do it. Now, the reality is what they're forced to do is put together an employment equity plan, and then they may be audited. I think really what you want to take a look at is not necessarily the companies that are afraid of the legislation, but in what I say is there's going to be a movement away from legislated equity. You've seen that fall away in our province. You've seen that fall away in California. It's coming under attack now in Michigan. And a movement towards what you call litigated equity. So litigated, so Home Depot recently had a $106 million case in the States around sex discrimination. You saw the Texaco case, $176 million race discrimination. You saw the $8 million case with Health Canada. So what's happening is people that are upset and are impatient with the government approach to this issue now go and see their lawyers, our friend, and it's much cheaper to use the government approach. I am not an advocate to do it because somebody's forcing you to do it. I'm suggesting if you recognize that there's something in it for you, and if you take a look at human beings, by and large, most human beings do things because there's something in it for them. Businesses operate exactly the same way.
Yeah, we already made that point. But the problem I have here, and I don't understand why anybody would do anything other than hire people who can do the job to the best of their ability, and race or gender. It was race, gender, disability, and what was the fourth one?
It's Aboriginal status.
Aboriginal status, which is that's another issue we can talk about entirely. We don't have a representative here tonight, but it's the idea of telling people what you have to do. And remember, there are many of these federally regulated bodies that, of course, aren't, the profit motive is not part of the dynamic. Mm-hmm. We're talking about public services, and that, of course, is where it becomes a major issue. Sir, again, I can see the arguments being made here. There have been injustices in the past. No one's going to deny that. We put them right now.
Yeah, I mean, I really like to hear from equity advocates talk about the strength of diversity and how that can benefit business. I really think that's a good line, and I think that's completely defensible. In fact, I go a little bit further. I would say that the market will correct the problem because of the very fact that no matter what the color of your skin, if you are a well-trained and talented person, you are indispensable. And those businesses who choose to discriminate on the basis of color or race or what have you will make themselves less competitive and, in fact, will fail.
All right, but should the government intervene in any way?
Absolutely not. There are numerous reasons why not. One that really glares out at me is the violation of the golden rule. No matter how you want to look at that, we should do unto others as we would have them do unto us. Government represents each of us. So to really figure out what this law is doing, we should never just think of government doing it to us. We should think of our next door neighbor doing it to us. What's the next door neighbor doing? The next door neighbor is coming to us and saying, you will hire, the next door neighbor is green and you're purple, okay? The next door neighbor is green and he comes to you and says, you will hire one of my green friends, or I will take out of your pocket $50,000 or $10,000 in the first instance. Is that something that you would want to happen to you? If the answer is no, then certainly you don't want the same thing to happen for anybody else. I mean, this is a do unto others as you would have them do unto you.
What about if the purple tribe had been exploiting the green tribe for about 5,000 years?
Again, this is you know, I really those well, yeah.
No, I mean, I'm going to go to a break here. On that wonderful rainbow coalition of debate, lines are open, 416-203-0302-905-332-3131. Employment equity, yay or nay? On Michael Coren live on CTS. Back in a moment. This is an issue that makes people very angry and passionate. Sometimes I believe they react in an extreme way, not fully understanding the issue. Other times they really do believe they understand the issue and they think it's not fair. It's about, I suppose, putting right to injustice of the past. Look, I don't see how anyone can argue with the fact that in the past, certain people certainly faced enormous discrimination. People of color, people with handicaps, women. I know a man, for example, who went to university in Toronto to study a medical science, and this was not very long ago. He was Jewish. And there was a quota. I think there were 13 Jews allowed in that year. That's it, we will allow 13 of you in. And his reaction was, okay, that means the worst I can do is come 13th. Okay, I suppose arrogance in the face of bigotry, but that's not the point. It is wrong, and people who say, well, it's always been like this, we did okay, that simply won't do. There are wrongs in society, and they must be put right. Now, some argue the market will dictate justice. People will hire the best for the job, and then everybody, irrespective of skin color or gender, will find occupation. But it does go deeper than that, because we can also talk about discrimination at the level of education, socialization, other issues like that. Should there be, if you like, a quota system? You'll hear people say it's not about a quota. Well, I think it comes down to the fact that there is a certain number of people required. You must represent in some way or other the population around you. Not always possible. There have been people of goodwill who've tried to achieve that, haven't been able to. Also people of less than goodwill, frankly, who say, I don't want to get involved in this. Lines are open, 416-2030-302, 905-332-3131. Putting profit aside for a moment, talk about, for example, well, let's say the police. Now, this is a very hot one because even more so than firefighters, much more, the police are dealing every day with people of every group. And I think it's very important they do represent the community. Otherwise, how can they actually deal with that community properly in all of its manifestations? But you'll hear this cry, and I really want to talk about this one from people saying, well, you know, I'm a white guy, I'm 24 years old, I've applied year after year, and I can't get in because. You've heard that, both of you, I'm sure, and so have you. How do we deal with that one? Because you know what happens? Black cops, and I'm sure you know them, I know several, say we get a hard time because we would have got in anyway, but we get in there and they say, oh, we know you're only in because. How do you deal with that?
That's a real problem. And, you know, I think that the government's approach here has been all wrong. I mean, to a certain degree, and there's no perfect system, of course, but there's a certain amount of, you know, the application form, for example, may be the first step in most jobs. Why bother knowing a person's sex? Why bother knowing a person's name, for that matter, if it's going to give a clue as to from what nationality or whatever they come from? You could simply have an agency assign a number and then have the government post at that agency, congratulations, number 11029, you've got an interview. That at least would convey some confidence that, look, the government's blind hiring in a sense. It doesn't know your sex, it doesn't know your age, it doesn't know your race, it doesn't know your nationality, etc. At least not until perhaps some kind of interview stage or maybe some kind of physical testing in the case of police or fire people or whatever. But I think that would be a better step than saying, you know, here's a quota and this shows everybody that we're, you know, trying to make things right. I mean, if you don't know, how can it possibly be the case that you're being racist?
I mean, can't we all agree that having a police force, I'm not going to use the politically correct term, having a police force that does look like the rest of society is incredibly desirable from every point of view? Yeah. I mean, can we not agree on that?
And I think there are bona fide reasons for employers sometimes to say, I'm not going to hire the 24-year-old white male, and the 24-year-old white males have to accept that. I mean, I'm no fan of quotas, but I do think a police force is an example of an employer where they have strong incentives to hire a workforce that looks like the community, and they should be allowed to do so. Now, if they began to swing in the opposite direction so that 24-year-old white males were never being hired, then we already have, under the rule of law in Canada, which treats every citizen, in theory at least, equally, checks and balances in place, human rights commissions, and lawyers like Paul who are willing to handle complaints from people who genuinely think they've been discriminated against. But I think, you know, if the police force is turning down some 24-year-old whites right now, that's probably a desirable thing, and that's not an employment equity issue. They're not doing that because they're mandated to. They're doing it because it's the right thing to do their job effectively, which is sort of what Trevor is saying.
Well, what you got to get back to is like, I guess the issue I would have had with Paul's statement around the market handling it is, if in fact we have been operating our systems based solely on merit all along, including the police forces, what is the likelihood that our police forces would have wound up as white and as male as they have for so many years? Are you suggesting to me that there have never been women or people of color or other people that do have the merit to do these jobs? So is this notion that if in fact...
Do you want a response?
Go ahead.
I mean, first of all, I think that policing often is passed down from father to son, and there are many people who know the occupation backwards, and so they're highly qualified. Personally, I have an enormous problem with some women in the police force. I think thugs are far more likely to use violence if they see a woman than they are if they see a man, thus making that woman actually pull her gun. And when it comes to minorities, you're talking about people, in many cases, whose language skills until the last 20 years, perhaps. Why is it giving me a break if I come up with a fact?
I was born in England. My skin is just as dark as majority.
No. Don't become hysterical. You're telling me. Yes, don't become hysterical. You're telling me that the people who come to this country, say from a non-English speaking country, their English is as good as someone who was born here.
No, I'm just suggesting to you that the vast majority of immigrants that come to this country came through England. So
what are you talking about?
I'm talking about that. Let's talk about West Indian immigrants. A vast majority of
why West Indian immigrants?
I'm just talking about from my family, from my family's background. Okay,
well, that's not typical.
Well, maybe if you take a look at immigrants that came in from 64 to 72. Yeah. So a vast majority had to come through Britain to get here to Canada.
I'm not talking about any particular period. All I'm saying to you...
All I'm suggesting to you that language may not be an issue for a vast majority of immigrants.
Honestly, really true. I think your reaction was a good example of why this sometimes doesn't work. When I make a statement, I think as self-evident as people who are born in Canada tend to have better English skills than people who are born outside of Canada, you'd say, oh my gosh, give me a break.
And it may not be true. That's all I'm suggesting to you.
He's talking about a tendency, though.
But on average,
it's a self-evident truth. I don't see how you can argue with it.
He's not saying that everybody has.
I think we should go back to another definition here of talking about. We talked about what diversity is and what equity is, and one of the things that Paul was talking about was the idea of hiring. And I think this is the big issue. We should talk about who's doing the hiring and do they know how to hire based on who's out there. And it's once if you did what Paul was talking about and you had a number, got the people in, then we're talking about promoting people and retaining people. So at some point, you're going to see their disability or you're going to see that their gender, and that becomes another issue that we need to discuss. Because when we talk about some of the complaints that people have from those 4 equity groups, some of them are getting in, but they're getting stuck, and they're saying at the top of the heap seem to be the same people. Why is that? What do I need to do to be promoted in a particular organization? So I think that one of the things that if we're talking about doing a better job at getting the best people in there, we have to figure out how to move these people up.
But let me just make one point.
Sure.
The point I'm making is when you take a look at the changes in Toronto society, Canadian society, the vast majority of people in here, English may not be their first language. The ability to speak a second language may be part of the ability to do a good job as a policeman, as a fireman, etc. The ability to speak these second languages is as much a part of the ability to do the job now as it's going to be over the next 10 years.
That's a valid point.
Been the last
but that's
20,
a complete contradiction of what you said 5 minutes ago.
No, what I'm suggesting to you is that you can't necessarily assume, first of all, that the immigrants that are coming in, always English is not going to be strong for them.
I didn't say that.
All right, so I apologize.
Okay.
I apologize. That was my reaction. Although
we have to go to a break. We have to go to a break. And there are lots of calls. 416-2030-302, 905-332-3131. We'll get to Sharon, Peter, Colleen, Charles, Robert, the rest of you when we come back on Michael Coren Live in any language you like in a moment. Just in case you wonder, people who are debating these high-level issues of employment equity and quotas, what do we talk about in the break? Dieting. Okay, let's go to the lines. They're very full. Sharon is on line 5. Hi, Sharon.
Hi.
Hello.
Nice to talk to you, Mike. I've been listening to your debate, and I wonder, is this about race or is it about mannerism? Because we all have different ways of projecting ourselves. I work in the healthcare industry, and I work in the lower end. That I work with many people of color, many people. And I have my clients that really have a hard time with this because, they were born 1910, say, and they don't want somebody of color because, fear breeds ignorance, breeds fear into these people, and so. But it is mandatory that these people be allowed to work these people, sorry, I didn't mean to say that, are allowed to work in this field. Or I see, in a case like that, if the client doesn't feel comfortable, they
But Sharon, if you're dealing with someone who is in their 80s, and we have to be very sensitive, they could have many fears, and we would hold ourselves accountable. And if we knew, look, there's Dorothy there, and let's face it, you know what she's like. Surely between you, you'd just say, I'll deal with her. You're dealing with isolated cases there. The vast majority of people are not like that. An old person, of course you're going to change, you're going to adapt, because she or he might be in another world for all you know. But is that a major issue? I mean, that's just something you deal with on a personal level.
Well, no. Another thing is, like, when you go to a Chinese shop to pick up something, some tea, or who do you deal with usually in a Chinese shop?
Probably a Chinese person.
Exactly.
Yeah.
you know, you go to anywhere, like say any kind of restaurant, like Greeks have the minority on restaurants.
Yeah, but Sharon, what's the point you're making?
The point I'm making is like they're saying like that you have to have visible people of color in jobs. You have to have that. Like, you know, I went to college 2 years ago.
Sharon, I don't know where we're going with that exactly, but I've heard this argument before. If you want to work in a Chinese restaurant and you're not Chinese, give it a try. I mean, maybe you'll be employed. Personally, it wouldn't really be for me, but people always say, what about Chinese restaurants? It's full of Chinese people. Well, have you ever applied to work in a Chinese restaurant? Do you really want to? But not to cast any aspersions on Sharon, but you do come across people who can give you problems, don't you?
Definitely. Yeah, of course. You know?
Isn't the answer here, I think, that, you know, government represents all of us, no matter what skin color or nationality, what have you. We're in Canada, we're being governed by Canada, and the employees are similarly, the employer is the government of Canada, which I think must represent everybody. So I don't think we can coddle racists or bigots by saying, well, look, you know, since some people don't want it, we're going to have a white ward or something like that. I think you just have to say, Dems de berries. You know?
No one's going to say that.
Yeah, and it also comes back to the merit principle once again. If that person happens to be the best person to work on my kidney and she happens to be Chinese, Korean, or whatever, then I want the best person to work on my kidney.
Right. I think she's talking about someone who perhaps is senile and could be frightened of many things around her, and you just be sensitive to that.
Very special case.
Yeah, exactly. Let's take another. Let's go to Peter on line 7. Hi, Peter.
Hi. It's an interesting thing you just brought up. I remember I was 11 years old, and I was at a children's hospital in Montreal, and I didn't know very much about it. I had to have a fairly minor operation, and I guess it was the hotel administrator told my father right in front of me that the doctor that was going to be operating on me was from Pakistan. And my father said, well, does he know what he's doing? And the administrator says, yes, he does. So that's the way it went. But I was very, very surprised that that type of thing would have even come up. And I guess that was probably in the mid-50s in Montreal.
Probably very few Pakistanis relatively few in the country, and especially doctors. I don't know why he would have been told by the administrator, even the nationality of the person involved. Any comments on that?
The question there is that we're talking about assumptions people make about who's the best for the job. That's what the argument's always about. If you go to a doctor, and this has happened, I'm sure, to lots of people, you go to the doctor, if the doctor comes out and the doctor is Pakistani or a black woman or something that maybe is unexpected for you, you immediately think, okay, well, can this person do what they're supposed to be doing? Whereas there's an assumption made, and it's an unfair assumption, that when you go to the leaders of a particular business, if they happen to be white males, that they're immediately qualified. And no one goes to them and says, okay, well, you know, are you the best person for the job as a white male? Whereas, generally speaking, the other groups always get that question. Well, you're a woman.
You know, that assumption, but not everyone does.
No, is that the case, or is it that people are saying, well, as long as they've had their medical education in North America, everything else is irrelevant? Or were they educated perhaps in a country where I'm not completely sure whether...
I think it is, it's appearance driven, and that provides some people discomfort in terms of their credentials, and that comes back to the idea of, if we're talking about who's the best for the job, and if we say a doctor has to have whatever the 10 credentials are that a doctor has to have, and we have all of these individuals from various backgrounds who have those credentials, then they can do the job. But there will people who will look at a particular doctor and assume that the best is, in a hierarchical order, white male, then other male, then white woman, then other woman, and so on and so forth.
Do people really do that?
Well, it's interesting that story the caller told us was from the 1950s. I mean, I suspect in 1950s Montreal, as you said, there were probably very few Pakistanis doing anything. They were rare. And that takes us back to a point I think you were trying to make earlier, which is part of the problem we see, because there is discrimination in a lot of workplaces, is simply a question of historical lag. 30 years ago, the Canadian population looked much different than it does now. And as you were pointing out, many of the people we're trying to integrate into the workforce either maybe have some linguistic difficulties in some cases or have credentials from countries that aren't the equivalent to Canadian credentials. And it takes time for people to sort of get up to speed and to acquire the merit points that you need to be hired on merit alone. And I'm not sure that employment equity is going to be providing those people who need to acquire those skills with better qualifications. It may be shoehorning them, though, into jobs that they can't really do well, and that only sort of exacerbates the problem where people tend to look at someone and think, oh my God, they're part of this group, they don't know what they're doing.
I think that's a little bit of a misleading thing. I mean, if you read the various bits of legislation, they are not merely to prevent discrimination. Okay, the employment equity has not as its sole goal preventing discrimination.
Because we have laws that do that already.
We already have laws that do that in the form of human rights laws. If you have a problem with someone discriminating against you, you go to the human rights, you complain. What the purpose and effect of these laws is, I mean, here's an article by Rosalie Abella, for example, called Equality, Human Rights, Women in the Justice System. And she says, women need to be treated differently in order to relieve past discrimination and to allow them to fully benefit from and contribute to society. This is not reverse discrimination, but rather a warranted change in society's point of view. This is the object of measures like employment equity. So what we're saying is, forget about discrimination. It's not just about that. It's about making a new appearance of a workforce, setting up role models so the rest of society can say, hey, I can do that.
And writing historical wrongs, which is
and writing historical
absurd.
wrongs. And now, from my point of view, it's never right to use racism to erase racism, because as long as you're using it, you're not erasing it. You're simply changing who was the perpetrator.
Racism? I mean, you know, one explanation, one definition put forward is it's bigotry plus power, and bigotry. There is no doubt that people of colour can be bigoted towards other people, but if you have power in a society, your racism actually takes effect. If you don't, it's largely irrelevant. I think that analysis actually is so facile, it's almost laughable. I mean, it doesn't take into account class, for example. I'm a man. Father's family Welsh miners, mother's family Welsh miners, father's family immigrants from Poland, who had more control in society, me, a working class man, or a woman whose daddy was a millionaire. I mean, to leave class out of that is just idiotic. However, when you say you can't write injustices of the past, shouldn't we be trying to?
I think you can, but I think when you dwell on the past,
you wouldn't say that if it was you, though.
I think when you dwell on the past, you are certain to repeat it. Okay. All we're really
avoid it though. I mean, if you've grown up with that legacy, if you are where you are because of it, can you ignore it?
Maybe not, but that's an attitude I think that you have to overcome yourself. It's the exact same, whether it be racism or envy, that all of us need to get over. You know, to say that we need to use racism, I think it doesn't really hold water.
I think I've got to go to break. But it's not only race, of course. I mean, Comrade Black's son and the son of a guy on welfare in Parkdale, I guarantee you their opportunities will not be equal. We'll talk about that and other issues when we come back. Employment equity, the idea of equality of opportunity. We reach different places, but equality of opportunity in this great utopian society of Canada. Back in a minute. A minute. We're talking about in the break manned cameras and peopled cameras. They're manned cameras. You can take this stuff to such extreme ends, it all becomes a farce, it becomes laughable. They are manned cameras. I don't care if it's a man or a woman or whatever behind the thing. They are manned cameras, honestly. Dictatorship of the vocabulary. We're talking about employment equity, quota system, if you like. That is a more pejorative term. I suppose a great leap towards equality. I think it is coming, but for many people, they will say, well, very slowly. A couple of lawyers I know, black lawyers, they say, we walk into court and generally it's, oh, you're in the wrong place, so you should be sitting there, assuming they've done something wrong or they've come to have a look at what's going on. A black lawyer? Goodness gracious me. Their attitudes and laws won't change those, only education will. But laws can change some things, perhaps. Colleen on line 8. Hello, Colleen.
Oh, hello, Michael.
Hello.
I just wanted to tell you, I do believe there was wrongs in the past, but that was the past, and you're punishing the ones that have nothing to do with it to right a wrong. We're a working-class family, and I put 2 boys through university, hoping that they would, do well. And when one of my sons graduated from B-Commerce with a B-Commerce degree, when the accounting firms came to the university to recruit, they stipulated that visible minorities and women were the only ones that they were going to choose. I don't know. The young coloured girl got 3 interviews, and she hadn't even taken the accounting course, just one course to make up a credit, and he tried to get into Revenue Canada, and he passed the math test with 100%, but apparently didn't pass the essay test, so he didn't get in, and I just feel quite bitter that I've got 2 young boys here and just fumbling around, fishing for something to get into, going back to school, doing something else.
And you know, I can appreciate the frustration with trying to find a job of whatever background you happen to be in. But one of the things that I think is interesting is that it seems that only now, when it seems that it's more difficult perhaps for white men to get positions, that people are up in arms. When traditionally, as we mentioned before, when we had maybe a smaller pool to choose from, and there wasn't the diversity that there is now, there was less competition. Now there's more competition, so it is tougher. And you have to have more credentials, more networking skills, more ability to build relationship. But I'm still saying that when you need to have all of those skills, and I think that people are becoming very sensitive, because it's just like anything. When it touches you, it becomes an issue.
The difference, though, between what's happening now and what's happening then is then there was no law that specified that everybody,
but
and I mean,
just
let me finish, that everybody is an equity group or what have you, except for white males, which is exactly how this act is defined. Under current equity legislation, every single person except white men, and only white men, are the exception.
No, that's not true. That is not true, Paul. Because I remember when I was in government, we were going through this situation. We asked, no. We went and asked groups to come and prove to us the forms of discrimination faced. And the #1 group proved to me hands down they were facing discrimination with gay men. Then we had to decide, do we make them a designated group? And we said, are you out of your mind? There's no way in the that any of the political parties were going to make gay men a designated group. They had proven to us discrimination, but we had left lots of groups out. And this is my problem with employment equity, that you've chosen, sometimes in a relatively arbitrary way, 4 groups to include under legislation, and you haven't included other groups that may either have, in fact, we had actually chosen in the Ontario government, we chose to put francophones in as a designated group for the Ontario government at the time, even though they had not proved discrimination.
But if you look at the discrimination, members of visible minorities is persons other than Aboriginal persons, because they're defined elsewhere in the Act, who are non-Caucasian in race or non-white in color. And at the beginning of the Act, it says the purposes of this Act is to correct the conditions of disadvantage in employment experienced by women, Aboriginal peoples, persons with disabilities, and members of visible minorities.
Sure, but
so there is one group. So there's only one group.
No.
You might be able to divide it into
older people.
You can have older white men and younger white men.
The point he's making is they're not there. I agree with it. He's saying there are only 4 groups there, and the only group actually excluded as a mass is white males. Men.
Whether they be gay or lesbian, or sorry, gay or lesbian.
They're not there either.
But whether they be gay or lesbian, whether they be old or young, white men are not included. They're not protected, and that is the reality that gentleman's facing coming out of school. I know, because I came out of a graduate situation where that exact same environment was there, where my wife, prior to a job posting, was getting a phone call, in the dark of the night. Hey, if there was this job opening and, it happened to be for a person of your height with your hair color, would you take it? And they were pre-interviewing before they even posted the job. Meanwhile, I couldn't find a job to...
I'm not disagreeing with that white males have been left out.
Yes,
the point I'm making is that, and this is actually where diversity comes in, is employment equity says we will assume that there's been disadvantage and discrimination against these 4 groups. I'm suggesting to you that there's been discrimination faced against lots of different groups, including white men. Not necessarily put everybody, but we do want to look at where discrimination has actually occurred.
Include them in the Act.
Let's have quotas for everybody.
You may not actually need the active then.
We have to discuss, though,
well,
Paul.
If you don't need
Are you telling me to go to a break? I didn't hear that.
No, well, Paul, what's the solution then? This is what we're saying.
Right.
Okay, if we're talking about 4 equity groups that are not including white males and we're saying that in the past we have not been fair, we're not fair now. What is it that we need to do to be fair to the people out there who are talented and are not getting opportunities to get in?
Let me throw an example. You talk about historical injustice. The black experience in Canada, to a large extent, is relatively limited. There were, of course, black people in Nova Scotia, black people who fought in one of the regiments in 1812, but as a mass group of people, relatively limited. Take a wave of great immigration. This may even affect you, I don't know. Let's say Irish Catholics. Now, when Irish Catholics came to this country, they were fleeing a forced starvation. In their home country. They had to leave simply because they would die otherwise. They came here to be greeted with Catholics in order to apply, no Irish, no dogs. Surely now we should really be trying our very best to make sure these people are, we put it right. We discriminated against them. They're all white, and half of them are men. And what are we doing there?
Well, that's right. If there's discrimination out there, why can't the Act say, look, this Act is not a short-term measure, it's forever. And if we want to make sure that the number of people in any given field of work represents the number of applicants or the number of people in the workforce, why not include everybody in the Act? Why not protect everybody? And so when this gentleman comes out of school and he finds a hard time getting a job, of course he feels anger, of course he feels rejection, because he's been disenfranchised. Everyone except him has a leg up through the Act.
But what you've just described is a human rights code, and we already have that. And what I don't understand, and I think what some of your callers don't understand, is why we suddenly need to create expensive new bureaucracies
because
to enforce protection for certain specific groups.
Right, because it's not just about getting rid of racism, it's about creating an egalitarian society. It's about, as they say, accommodating differences and using special measures to do so.
Now you're reading from an Act since, what is it, 1986, right?
1996.
Okay, but the original Act. The original.
Well, that was scrapped, and this was the new one brought in by the Liberals in '96.
But Paul,
well,
again,
if you take a look at that Act, the employment equity has been federally regulated since 1986 in Canada. Is it worked?
Well,
have you seen much change?
Well, I'm not advocating employment equity.
No,
you're the one.
I don't know what the right answer is. I would have thought yes.
If there's a big fear. Oh well, let's take a look. I mean, let's take a look at the boardrooms of corporate Canada. Mighty white, mighty male.
Well, hold on one sec. Well, before you go, this is rhetoric. With all due respect, it's silly rhetoric. How many people in the boardrooms of Canada? 0.0001% of the population.
Let's take the top senior management group then.
I have no links to anyone in my family, in Britain or this country, who is in any way related or knows someone in a high level of a corporation. And I'm white.
And that's exactly the point. Because the reality is, it's not about discrimination just about four groups. It's about discrimination that has occurred in the workplace. And if, in fact, you're going to take a look at this issue, you have to look at where discrimination takes place.
But you know what? The head of the Bank of Montreux, who is now in Britain, was Matthew Barrett, who was an Irishman, whose family did face all of that nonsense, and said, well, you know what? I'll give him a kick in the teeth. I'm going to make it. 416-203-0302, 905-332-3131. Charles and Shannon and Mike and Bonnie and Sam and the rest of you on Michael Coren Live back in a moment. See you then. Now, having said all of this, imagine you are, let's say, 19 years old and you're black, and you walk in for that interview, and no one there actually has any sort of malice towards you, but you look around, and everyone's white, and they're very welcoming, but none of them actually look like you, and you've gone to a school where the teachers are great. But to be honest, virtually everyone is white, and they really tried their best. These are good people. But none of them really look like you, and you've learnt about wonderful writers of the past, and they're great, but they're all white. And you feel, do I really belong? Now, no one has any ill will. I actually believe the degree of explicit racism, heartfelt, is actually very limited. But how about the way that person would feel? I tell you, I've been in working environments. One black guy, and you wonder, I wonder how he does feel. I wonder how he does feel. We mustn't be crass when we deal with all this. It's a very sensitive issue. 416-203-0302, 905-332-3131. Let me reintroduce my panel. On my far left, well, not many people's far left, is Paul McKeever, lawyer and member of the Freedom Party. Adrienne Snow is a policy analyst for the National Foundation for Family Research and Education. Trevor Wilson is a diversity strategist, author Diversity at Work, The Business Case for Equity, and Cheryl McConney is TV host of Daytime on Rogers Cable Systems, and you, Charles, on Line 6. Hello, Charles.
Hello, Michael.
Hello.
How are you?
I'm very well, thanks.
I listened to your guest talk tonight, and I say, thank God we don't have to depend on them to solve this discrimination at work. I think economics would solve it. I think we're going into the 20th century with so much information, everybody would be more educated, and companies and organizations would be forced to employ the best. And they cannot get the best from only one race, and that would solve it. And it will become so unfashionable in the 20th century that it will just disappear.
You're here.
Well, you have more faith in the market than I do, actually. But you really think the market's going to solve everything here?
I think it's with one caveat on that, and that is that people need to tell the truth about discrimination.
That's right.
And we, you know, especially as Canadians, where we're very polite about this stuff. I mean, you start talking about racism, you start even talking about issues of creed or sexual orientation, people definitely don't want to talk about that. If you truly do confront this stuff and you start to take a look at the history that has existed, once you start to take a look at that, then there's an opportunity to overcome some of those issues. But those issues didn't just face women, didn't just face people of color, didn't just face Aboriginal people. So my issue is, let's take a look at discrimination wherever it exists and start to remove it. And then we can rely on the free market. If we tell the truth about the merit principle, and the truth is that we've been living a lie on the merit principle, then there's an opportunity for us.
Trevor, I've heard this so many times that you know, we don't want to talk about this. It seems to me I can't open a newspaper for years now without another article on the plight of gay men and the plight of this group. We seem to do nothing but talk about it.
Yeah, I think the reality is that black people spend a lot of time talking to other black people about white people, and maybe white people spend a lot of time. I don't think that we spend a lot of time.
The three of us.
Yeah, I noticed that actually. I noticed that when we came in, we got to sit over here. But the notion is that I think it's more a cross communication about this issue. You and I read the same paper in different kitchens. You know what I mean? And I think that there's more dialogue, understanding the. This is where that whole, even though that Men Are From Mars stuff is a bit tongue in cheek, the reality is it's starting to open up another world for groups of men that have never even recognized that there might be another way of looking at things. And I think the same thing could be said for race, culture, gender, and any other kind of difference that is brought into the world of work. We have to start to tell the truth that we may not necessarily have understood how these issues have impacted people in work, and then we can start to deal with the question of merit from a perspective.
Okay. Good point. Let's go to Shannon on line 5. Hi, Shannon.
Hi, Michael. How are you?
Well, thank you.
That's good. I couldn't help but comment, Michael, this racism thing, this ethnic thing, you know, I'm 19, but I've always been grown up to realize that, you know, we're all equal. We're all the same amount of people. There is nothing in, you know, let's take, for instance, a Chinese person. There's nothing different in a person there than us. You know what I'm saying? And I think that we should all be created equally. I think we should all have...
Well, we are all created equally, and physiologically we're 99% the same, irrespective of race. But unfortunately, just something as banal as the difference in skin color has really been the difference between life and death for many, many years, hasn't it?
It is, and I think the thing is, you know, we all get the same training for a job. You know, we're all able to have our opportunities. And I think the thing is, you know, people have to accept different races and different nationalities and give everybody an opportunity. You know,
that's what we're trying to achieve, and we don't care too much about, you know, people who don't want equality. We're talking about the mass aspiration, which is equality, and how to achieve it, I suppose. And there are the differences. Thank you for that call. Let's go to Mike on line 2. Hello, Mike.
Hi, Michael. How are you?
I'm well, thank you.
Well, first of all, I'd like to say hi to Trevor. I guess when I came to this country 27 years ago, I started working for a bank, and me and him were working with a bank. I don't think you remember me.
Do you remember him?
Yeah.
Well, do you want to give your last name, Mike?
Sorry?
Do you want to give your last name?
Urgi.
No.
No, he doesn't.
Sorry.
He doesn't care. You know, he meets them, he discards them.
Well, 27 years. I can barely remember yesterday if I'm lucky. I'm 42.
Okay. Carry on, Mike, anyway.
Anyways, yeah, what I like to say, like, I've been here so long, and, you know, I'm in this country, like, you know, it's very accommodating and everything. I moved here from Africa back in 1972, and I'm telling you, the discussion we're having here today, I mean, it's a free country, and we're having a discussion. We won't be able to have the same discussion over there, because believe me, if you don't speak the language over there, they will not hire you, you know. And as far as I'm concerned, this is discrimination in process against the white man. I've been in business myself for the last 5-6 years, and then I know how the other businessmen work. And if you're of a certain minority, they will hire you because they trust you more than they'll trust anybody else. And I think that everybody has to work together, because this debate is a never-ending debate. You know, as far as I'm concerned, any employer has to hire the best qualified person, regardless whether you're blue, green, yellow, whatever.
But, you know, Mike, before you say that, because, you know, with respect, that is the big cop-out. Yeah. It's not about being blue or green or yellow. It's about white people who have guns and big ships going to where black people live and saying, you're going to work for us until you die and we'll make money out of you and build lovely countries. You know, I don't want to be too dramatic about this, but let's not talk about blue, green. It's mainly about the issue between black and white. There are many other races involved, but that's been whether the two fists have come together, and one group has really suffered. Interestingly enough, you've been hired by some South African companies, haven't you, to deal with their diversity issue?
That's right. I've been hired by a company called SAB that probably the most progressive company I've ever seen on this issue. Now, interestingly enough, they have done it because of business reasons as well. 98% of their market are black Africans. They've recognized that they need to understand the market. They also recognize that they have a responsibility under the new Mandela government to do it. But I think in many ways, again, they've recognized that there is a lot of talent that has been missed under the apartheid years, and the only reason that it has been missed is because of some other piece of legislation, i.e. apartheid, that has kept a lot of talent from coming to the head, sort of thing. So I think that we can now look to South Africa as a place where, in many ways, this issue of diversity is going to be a major, major business issue, and going to teach the rest of the world. And even though they're going to have employment equity legislation, there are companies that have run way beyond any sort of legislative mandate to do some incredible things in this area.
Okay, 416-203-0302, 905-332-3131. One more segment here, and then we're going to education and equity on Michael Coren Live. Back in a moment. Welcome back to Michael Coren Live on CTS. We're talking about employment equity, equality, a quota system, if you like, diversity. The terms are thrown around. You'll find that people who are opposed to this sort of thing call it a quota system, and those who really support it call it diversity. We'll see. Bonnie on line 1. Hello, Bonnie.
Hi.
Hello.
I am not a bigot. I don't care about your color of your skin or what nationality you come from.
Sorry, did you say you're a bigot?
No, I said I'm not a bigot.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry.
I don't care what race you are from or anything else. I think the people who go get these jobs should be very qualified for them. I don't think that you should be a minority and get a special into it, because it's not fair to the public you're serving or the job you're doing if you're not qualified to do it in the first place. And my example was, a couple years ago, I went to a hospital. The intern that I was seen by was from East India, I believe. But it didn't bother me one bit. It bothered me that I had to spend an hour talking to him about what a pothole was, because that's what I happened to step in at the time. So it was kind of painful to sit in the waiting room for an hour explaining what a pothole was instead of being seen by the doctor.
You spent an hour explaining what a pothole was?
Uh-huh.
Really?
Yep, he didn't quite understand the method of it.
Well, couldn't you just... I don't understand why it would have taken an hour. I have to say, for example, the British experience, where the South Asian community has been there for longer, is that you now have a large number of doctors who are from that part of the world. Let's be quite specific here. I'm not going to be politically correct about this nonsense. Large number of Jewish doctors in this country too, but in Britain the same. Large number of South Asian doctors. And no one even, it's just not an issue. And in fact, I will say this, there's probably an assumption that they're qualified. Now that's equally wrong, I mean, you should just judge the doctor on whether they're good or not, but there is the assumption if they're South Asian, they know what they're doing. I mean, you know, I don't think, I mean, the fact that it's a bit odd that he didn't know what a pothole was, because there has to be a certain English skill for a doctor to operate here. I would certainly, if you're at all concerned about where they qualified, that will be an issue, but you can't really work in this country unless you're qualified. It can be very hard, in fact, you have to re-qualify, even if your qualifications are adequate.
You know, though, Michael, with this most recent decision, the Supreme Court of Canada out in BC, there was a female firefighter, for example, who had run a certain distance for about 4 times and failed the test every time. And the Supreme Court of Canada essentially said that in order for there to be a standard, it has to be one that, you know, is rationally connected with the need, rationally necessary for the job, has to be intended to be, you know, to meet that goal. And finally, it has to be no more stringent than is necessary to accommodate everybody to the point of, but just short of, undue hardship. In other words, all employers have to undergo hardship to the point just short of undue hardship in order to accommodate people. So we have a situation where, you know, there were female firefighters complaining that this other woman had gotten the job, or rather won the case, when they had simply worked out and achieved the physical capability.
She had passed every other strength test. And there was the argument made, well, why this stamina test in such a way? And the other argument being made, should we retest firefighters on a regular basis? And the unions say no to that, because many men would fail.
Doing the job before.
Exactly,
She had been doing the job before.
Right. Yeah,
but there was a point that Bonnie made that was quite interesting, because I've heard this before. People say to me, well, you know, Trevor, it doesn't make any difference to me that you're black. It doesn't make any difference to me at all. And I say, well, it makes a hell of a difference to me, because, like, I've been black a long time, and I actually don't want you to ignore, I don't want you to make that my whole identity, but that is a part of my identity. As much of my identity is being born in Britain and being a father, and I mean, this is part of my identity, and taking that part out of it and saying, just because I don't want to deal with that, I'll say, okay, I'm going to ignore that.
But now you're heading down a very slippery slope that we've touched on a couple of times, I think, when we've been talking about discrimination against gays. Or at the very start of this show, I think, Cheryl, you were talking about employment equity or diversity would include religion as a criterion to look at. Frankly, if I'm an employer, I don't want to know what my employees' sexual practices are. I don't want to know what their religion is. And I'm not all that interested in their cultural background, except in those areas where it allows them to do a better job for my company, or a worse job. And so what you're starting talking about is that what we want to...
One at a time.
What it sounds to me like the direction in which you're pushing it is saying employers have to accommodate all personal foibles in the name of diversity. And that's a very different question from saying, let's give people a fair shake regardless of their skin color.
Cheryl, you just said, why is it one at a time now?
Yes.
What do you mean by that?
Well, I'm thinking we're talking about diversity in different ways of arguing or discussing a topic. At one point, nice contentious argument, good television, and all that sort of stuff. Let's say there's a point that needs to be made or that's going to be made, and someone has a different delivery. Okay, their point is value. In order to get involved in this discussion, they have to argue the same way. The same sort of argumentative,
it's called common courtesy.
No, but that wasn't there before. I'm saying now you said, when she was speaking, you said,
I've given them more
Trevor?
time than you?
No, I'm saying.
So what are you saying?
No, I'm saying when I forgot her name. What's her name? Sorry.
Adrienne.
Adrienne. When Adrienne was speaking.
My friend Michael the Bigot.
Seriously.
Common courtesy. I thought you're taking a long time to say something I can't understand. What are you saying?
I'm saying when Adrienne was speaking and Trevor wanted to interject, you said.
I said one at a time.
You said wait till she's finished.
As I've said when he was being interrupted.
Earlier on, when Paul was speaking, and we were all discussing, there was no mention from you as a facilitator to say, okay, Paul, finish your point. You know, so I'm just saying that there's a difference.
Who am I being the bigot towards?
I'm not talking to you about being a bigot.
What are you saying?
Don't use that word. I'm saying what you're doing, or what we're doing here, is that there's different communication, not necessarily abilities, but different ways of delivering a point.
What are you talking about?
Listen, try and listen to me.
I'm listening now, but you're not getting anywhere. This is TV, and you've got to make your point. What are you saying?
I'm saying that if you communicate in a contentious manner,
what does that mean?
If you're going to be argumentative and loud, then you get your point across.
Well, who is being loud here?
Me.
I'm not.
Can I make one point?
No, I want to finish it because this is very, very important here. What are you saying this hasn't been fair?
No, no, no. I am saying, okay, and I'm going to try and say it one last time, God help me.
Okay,
that when we were talking about diversity earlier, we were talking not only about race and gender, but about things like learning styles and methods of communicating and all of that sort of stuff. Here, in this particular forum, we've had people who have different methods of communicating. And if you want to communicate at this sort of level that seems to have been appreciated, you have to communicate in a sort of aggressive manner. And when Adrienne was speaking,
aggression from anyone.
Well, you see, I'm not finished yet, okay?
Well, you are actually, because we're running out of time. And then you can get your own show, and if not, you can take me to a Human Rights Commission.
You're bad.
That was very indicative, I think. When we come back, we will be speaking about this sort of issue when it comes to education, but no shouting. On Michael Coren Live on CDS, 416-203-0302, 905-332-3131. Back in a moment.